Okay, check-in time natin. Tingnan natin po ang oras ngayon, no? Okay, 19 minutos. Okay, pasado alas 7. Okay, gabi ng Miyerkules, 10 po ng Enero 2023 sa gabing ito, no? Okay, sa programa natin. Hindi po magkamali ang digital relo natin. Okay, pagdating sa oras, no? Ayan. So, yan po ang pasok ng programa natin. Okay, dito po sa Consolidated News. Okay, sa sentro ng balita natin. Okay, babati ako ng magandang gabi. Okay, good evening sa lahat. And then sa, okay, international pagbati natin sa mga kapatid natin. Okay, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, no? Okay. Anong proposal ito ni Anthony Blinken, mga kababayan, no? Okay, ang propaganda ni Anthony Blinken, okay, Secretary of State of State of America, mga kababayan, ano kaya itong proposal niya sa pinalabas mga suki, no? Okay. Okay. Hindi po pwede puro propaganda lang. Kailangan po totoo po ang sinasabi mo mga suki, mga kababayan, na. Okay. Tingnan natin po. Makuha ba kaya natin ito? Okay. Ng mga tagapakinig natin, na. Okay. Okay, nawala na po mga suki, no? Okay. Ayan. And then, paunahin po natin na mabuti, okay, itong pagbisita po ng, okay, presidente po ng Indonesia sa ating bansa. Itong presidente magaling po, mga kababayan, okay, ng Indonesia, si Joko Widodo, no? Okay, napayaman po niya ang Indonesia, mga suki, sa kanyang termino. Okay, itong si Joko Widodo, mga kababayan, no? Bumisita sa atin, okay, sa ating bansa, mga kababayan. Okay, tingnan natin kung ano ang balita niya dito sa Pilipinas, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Okay. Okay. Exchange agreement, no? Okay, presentation of sign of the MOU and leader statements. Okay, yan po ang mga statement po ay nirelease po ng dalawang leader, no? Okay, itong siyempre ang host natin, okay, si President Ferdinand Bongbong Romualdez Marcos Jr., no? And then sa kabilang panig, okay, itong si President, okay, Joko Widodo po, no? Okay, magaling performance ng tao itong mga suki, no? Okay, mahaba-haba na lang term niya. Okay, yan po sa kanyang bansa. Okay, tama na. Hindi ninyo makita, no? Okay, importante po nga ang statement po ng dalawang leader, no? Okay, para sa kalaman po ng taong bayan ng Masuki mo. Ito din ninyo makita, no? Okay, yun kasi pangarap na, pero parang kuwan naman. Okay. Yung arrival ito mga kababayan, no? Okay, cut muna natin. Papasukin natin po si Farhat Abdul Karim mga suki, no? Sa kanya report. Unahin po natin kasi malayo po ang uwian niya dyan sa Cotabato City, no? Sa kabilang, okay, sa kabilang laot pa. O kaya tubig mga suki, no? Ayan. Okay, nasaan ka na, Tarhata? Okay. Okay, sandali lang. Antayin natin si Tarhata, no? Okay, ready ka na? Go ahead. Sige na.
Hello?
Okay, okay na. Hmm. Intro. Intro. Okay. Malakas. Malakas. Hmm. Okay, malakas, malakas. Sige na, go ahead.
or 6,800,000 ang halaga ng what gusto yung at ang yung Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. As what I mentioned a while ago for us, sa ating ulat at sa ating mga responsibility, karoon sila sa ating elemento ng materialan o liquid. Ito ay kasama ang nastura is 51st mechanized brigade Congress na maging batalyon at mga tawahan ng PHP and the NCPO sa Community Police Colonel Sultan Salman Kapal ang potential na director ng Regional General PCPO at nagsikalamisan ang legal cooperation sa pamamagitan ng batas ng administrator sa pagkakatanstan ng walang piraso ng jeep skilled transparent practices na naglalaman ng pagkakatanstan sa nilalang. So, na may kailangan higit nilang ng 1,000 grams at may pamensang average ng halagang 6 million 8,000 pesos. So, ang target o mga suspect ng kanyang mga kasamahan ay nagawang tumakas kung katulong sa palayan na lugar na nararamdaman na ang gusto na kanilang pangagaraan ay isang ahente ng Korea. Habang hinahabol naman ng pick-up pinagpapasya nila ang mga alagad ng batas sa gamit ang hindi natutunan o yung bali na natutulog sa huli na kumansin. Walang naiulat naman na nasawi o nasigatan man lang mula sa magkabilang kanto. So, matapos ang field operation ay nagawa naman ang inventory at pagmamangka ng ebidensya ng nararapat na saksihan ng mga media practice nila. Ito ay naroon ang sinaksihan sa honorable Honan ilang nilalek sa Barangay Sina at kapayan at representative from the Constitution Office o o maging mga North na hindi ito available na pero nagpagawa ng coordination via phone call nito na January August 2024. So, officials and agents from the Federal Bank. Police Colonel Sultan Salman Kapal hindi rin ito. At kapag ng nakumpitan at nakumpitan droga at non-drugs ay dinalahan sa kanilang tanggapan para sa pamanggistisyon ang natura ng nakupiska. So, kailangan ulat, karagdagang ulat, isang vehicular accident na itala sa dito sa National Highway ng Barangay Sayon sa Sultan Kudarat Regional North. Ito ay sa pagitan ng isang Toyota at isang Toyota Fortuner. Kahit wala umanong nasaktan, sa incident ay wasak naman ang ulong bahagi ng Fortuner at nasira rin ang isang bahagi ng ulong kanya. So patuloy pa rin ang investigation at agad dinala ng Sultan Kudarat ng tanggapan ang support ng mga sasakyan.
Okay. Meron pa?
Yes, sa aking panagulat ko kanina ay nagkaroon ng meeting para sa mga liga ng mga barangay, sa 7 barangay kanina. At ito ay isinagawa sa may Soria Hall sa may Robinson, Hall 1, Soria Hall sa Robinson na Mall of dito sa lingkod ng Cotabato. At ayun nga, hindi lahat ng mga kapitan or chairman ng barangay ay dumalo dahil meron silang equal priority ng kapitan. Ngunit ito na kami representatives for us. At itong pagpapulong na ito ay malaking impact ito, upang makatulong ito sa mga bawat barangay at ma-address nila sa lahat ng mga programa ng LGU na halimbawa ng mga training program at kung saan naman yung kanilang mga infrastructure, meeting, training ay pagiging aware sila. So, inshallah, kung tayo ay makapagpupulong uli at makapagpupulong sila muli ay magpupulong, ay kung hindi kami kakamali sa ibang lugar na, no? So, kanina ay pangalawang munisyon naman ang sa ating interview kay spokesperson ng lugar ng barangay, no? So, ayun, naging matagumpay niya, alam natin kanina, although ito ay umabot ng 10 oras lamang, no? Dahil lahat ay kanya-kanyang pinagkakaabalaw. So, inasa natin sa susunod pang meeting ay maka-attend tayo, ipag tayo ay ma-aware sa anong mga programa ng ating review o sa ating mga legal na barangay ng section barangay sa natin. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, yan lang? Meron pa?
So far, yun lang naman, dahil kanina ay dito sa Cotabato, hindi naman sa ating weather report, dito sa Cotabato kanina ay napakalakas ng ulan dito mula alas 5:30 at tapos ito pasado alas 7, no? So, makikita natin sa kahabaan ng santo sa Maynila, ay ulan ihod yung daanan at halos lahat ng dumadaan ay bumabalik dahil hindi sila makakakawid dahil sa napakalalim tubig sa daan at mistulan ulit sa bawat kalsada sa Cotabato. So far, sa mga oras na ito ay alhamdulillah at nag-stop na rin yung napakalakas na dumaan ng ulan dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato. At tulitan sa kanina, nakita natin maraming motor ang nasira dahil ngayon sa lakas ng ulan at nakabita sila sa daan. But alhamdulillah, tayo po ay nakarating sa ating paroroonan na matiwasay. At dito tayo nasali din sa mga motor na mas nabit sa daan. Yes, sir.
Okay, mga suki. Umulan pala dyan, no? Malakas ulan dyan sa inyo. Okay, dito sa Zamboanga naman, kabaligtaran. Mainit. Sobra init po dito sa Zamboanga. Okay, paggabi, malamig. Okay, so, extra ka na.
Nagtatanong saan daw yung schedule dyan sa Zamboanga?
Sabihin mo dito po sa Rancho del Rio subdivision, no? Rancho del Rio subdivision. Okay.
Malay niya, may nasa-invite sa ating kaibigan, no? At pagpunta dyan sa Ilisig, sa Pilis, sa Awetawis, sa Basira, kasi sa Zamboanga, malay niya, may magdaan kayo dyan.
Okay, wala problema. Pakapehin pa kayo. Okay, pakapehin mga suki, no? Okay. Okay. Sige. Extra ka na.
Okay, sir. Maraming salamat po pa hanggang sa muli sa susunod nating balita. Mula dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato, sa moratorium ng hindi na para sa servisyo publiko tuwid ng mamaya ng nagalang ng report.
Okay. Yan po si correspondence natin ng matagal-tagal na, no? May ilang taon na. Mahigit 1 taon na yan, no? Okay, si Tarhata Abdul Karim. Okay. Kasi pag maghanap ng balita, no? Okay. Ayan po ang unang salvo ng balita natin, no? Okay. Salamat. Okay. Uwi na kayo?
Ano na yan natin, magawa ka ng mga esakla kami.
Sige. Okay, masipag kayo.
At least nakapag-report na ako kasi, ipost ka natin sa YouTube.
Okay, malakas ulan, no?
Para mas malong, yeah.
Okay, sige. Salamat. Bye-bye na.
Okay.
Okay, break muna natin and then isunod natin po ang balita naman galing sa atin, no? Okay. Sayang po okay na wala pong Okay, yung propaganda po ni Anthony Blinken, no? Okay. Bigla na bura. Okay. Okay, ito nga on Palestine, the gap between the US right. Anong pakinggan natin ito, no? Para maintindihan natin. Okay.
This man. For the U.S., which has made huge commitments to Israel militarily, financially, and...
Okay. Okay, bakit nawala?
Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. How does Israel's war in Gaza fit into U.S. national security interests? Let's get to the bottom line. Despite a fragile pause in the fighting, all signs point to long-term conflict in the Middle East, and not only between Palestinians and Israelis. There have been attacks all along the border between Lebanon and Israel for the past month and a half, and recently the Houthis in Yemen, 1,000 miles away, hijacked a cargo ship owned by an Israeli businessman. For the U.S., which has made huge commitments to Israel militarily, financially, and diplomatically since Israel's war in Gaza started last month, the region is stuck between domestic policy currents and foreign policy interests. President Joe Biden's embrace of Israel is dividing his own party. An increasing number of Americans from both parties say that Israel has gone too far in its response to the attacks by Hamas. So where is U.S. policy heading, and where do U.S. national security interests really lie? Those interests are up for debate in today's America, so we'll be getting two very different takes. We'll start with a view from the right with Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Donald Trump. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. As we're speaking, Israel and Hamas have reached a deal where Israeli hostages are going to be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. How do you feel about this deal, and what are your expectations?
Well, I think everybody from a humanitarian point of view should welcome the people who were kidnapped on October the 7th being released. I have a general objection to making swap deals for hostages. I think this case is a good example of why it's a bad idea. Number one, the ratio is 3-to-1. That's never a good sign. Number two, the people that Israel is going to release are essentially criminals. They're not people who were kidnapped while they were enjoying themselves at rock festivals or something like that. So I think this moral equivalence is a mistake, and I think it gives an incentive to hostage takers because if they can bargain like this, they know that taking hostages is well worth it. And I also don't like many of the terms associated with the deal. It may be that a pause of 4 days does give Israel some time to regroup and rethink its next steps, but Hamas is far and away the greater beneficiary in terms of extricating some of its fighters, regrouping, hiding the other hostages, exfiltrating some of their people from Gaza. And I don't like the part that says if Hamas turns over another 10 people a day, the pause can continue. I would never give my enemy control over the extent of the ceasefire. And I think, although again, I understand fully the compassionate humanitarian argument here, I don't think we should miss the strategic implication. I think Israel's right of self-defense includes eliminating the Hamas threat. And to the extent we take our eye off that strategic objective, I think it increases the chances they will fail. And we will be right back to where we were on October the 6th in fairly short order.
But the global south is screaming. We've got a lot of our European allies that are really calling out Israel for overreaction and what they see as indiscriminate killing of many Palestinians. I mean, I guess my question to you is, if you were in an office and advising any next president that came up, should there not be some effort to really diminish the footprint of horror for innocents?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the international pressure, I can tell you when I've been in the government and I've heard about international pressure, if I had a switch inside my ear, I just turn it off. If you don't pay any attention to it, it's not pressure. But here's where I think the most important point that many commentators and national leaders are missing. I do not consider this a war of Hamas against Israel. I consider this a war by some of America's worst enemies, led by the mullahs in Tehran, using their terrorist surrogate groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, like the Houthis in Yemen, like the militia groups in Iraq, in what Qasem Soleimani, the late Qasem Soleimani, called the Ring of Fire strategy against Israel. And that's why I think in the Arab world in particular, if people understood this better, and I think many of the leaders do understand it, they would see this is not an attack on the Arab world. This is Israel defending itself from the leadership in Tehran, and doing to the Palestinian people what has happened to them in the past, being used by outsiders for their own purposes. And I think if you understand it in that respect, it would be easier, not easy, but easier for many people in the region to understand what Israel is doing, and to see where the real perpetrator, the real moral cause of this is, and it is the government of Iran.
What is your view of President Biden's take on Israel-Palestine? And what are your views? I know you've got some provocative thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think the two-state solution is irretrievably wounded. I think it was dead before October the 7th. I think it's dead and buried now. I don't think Israel is ever going to consent to the creation of a state on its borders that's run by terrorists. I think my view has been for a long time what I call the three-state solution, and nobody likes that either. But I would say congratulations to the Egyptians. You now have sovereignty again over the Gaza Strip as you did pre-1967. And I think on the West Bank, I think this is actually more doable. I think Israel and Jordan have to figure out a relationship that returns some sovereignty over the West Bank.
Give Gaza to Egypt and give West Bank
part of the West Bank to Jordan. Now, I happen to think this is actually the best measure for the welfare of the Palestinian people. I think the notion of a Palestinian state that includes Gaza and an archipelago of dots on the West Bank cannot be economically viable. And I think for Palestinians and their families, these people need to be part of a strong economy. Their children need to have schools. They need to be in a place where they can lead a normal life. And in the Gaza Strip and many places of the West Bank, it's simply not possible. Let's not kid ourselves. Let's put the welfare of the Palestinians above ideological dreams.
I mean, let me just wrestle with you a little bit on this. Why abandon the notion that somehow with security and autonomy and creating conditions where responsible Palestinian patriots that believe in a sort of fair future for their people, and a balanced future recognizing Israel, why is that dream gone? Because for 75 years Palestinians have been trying to cling to that land.
Well, they've been trying to cling to a part of the land they're never going to get back, which is called Israel. Their whole argument is they were forcibly displaced during the 1948 conflict and in subsequent conflicts, and they declare themselves to be refugees. 5 million, I think that's the right number, of Palestinians are registered as refugees with UNRWA. But the problem is we have allowed those who had aims to weaponize the Palestinians against Israel to use them in ways very unfair to the Palestinians. And we have allowed the idea that refugee status for Palestinians is hereditary, which it is not. Humanitarian doctrine on refugees across the world since 1945, with this one exception, has been that life in refugee circumstances is the worst outcome of all. That for the refugee population, they either need to return to their country of origin or they need to be resettled. Given the politics, they're not going to go back to what they consider their country of origin. It's not going to happen. Israel's not going to disappear. So that's why I think resettlement for the Palestinians themselves is the fairest, most just way to resolve their status.
So how does that not fall into the definition of ethnic cleansing, which triggers all these accusations of war crimes? That ethnic cleansing, you hear it constantly, is what the criticism of Israel has been for Palestinians who feel wrongly displaced from their land. And right now, we see even the Israeli government trying to withhold the settler movement in the West Bank and prompting violence with the West Bank to further encroach on this.
Right. Well, that's not my argument. My argument is that after conflicts, there are often large flows of population. If you look at the world after World War II, it's filled with refugees.
Well, we see that with Ukraine, Russia, and we see refugees all over the world.
And the worst place for these people is in refugee camps. It's especially the worst place when they live there generation after generation. The fact is that resettlement in viable economies in the region would make a lot of sense, but for the fact Arab governments don't want to take the Palestinians in. This is another consequence of the terrible decision to weaponize the Palestinian refugees. In Egypt, they're concerned that Hamas, which is a subsidiary of the Muslim Brotherhood, would simply be a greater threat to Egypt. The Jordanian government feels the same way. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. I don't deny it, but I tell you, resettling people in Gaza after this conflict is just going to mean the conflict is going to happen again. The Palestinian Authority is not an alternative. Back in the 2007 elections, I think it was, in Gaza, people were surprised that Hamas won. And many said, well, you know, it's actually not because they favor terrorism. They simply will not tolerate the dysfunctional, corrupt Palestinian Authority taking control, and Hamas looked like an alternative. Let's face it, not much of an alternative. I think that Gaza is different from the West Bank. I think the West Bank is amenable to different solutions, but for Gaza, which is a large refugee camp, that is not a solution that is the best future for the Palestinian people.
Let me ask you about what's going on inside America. Are you surprised by, this growing groundswell of criticism of Israel's actions after the Hamas attacks and U.S. complicity and support in that response?
Yes, I am very surprised at it. I think it's a potentially a mortal wound politically for Joe Biden. You know, in the last 50 years, the two parties completely reversed themselves. It used to be the Democrats very pro-Israel, Republicans not, often because of anti-Semitism, let's be honest about it, within the Republican Party. Now, because of the shifting views of the evangelical Christians who are more strongly supportive of Israel than some in the Jewish community, the Republican Party is close to unanimous in supporting Israel. The Democrats, I think, look split down.
Anti-Semites and all.
Yeah, amazingly. But the Democrats are split down the middle, and I think this is a really serious problem for Joe Biden in 2022.
There are a lot of people who don't see this conflict the way you do, and they don't see the kind of pro-Israel stance in the same way. They may support Palestinians, see decades of injustice, see it differently. Some of these people are being canceled or fired, etc. I know you've always been a proponent of fair and open discourse and debate. How do you feel about the criticism of those who do stand up for the Palestinian side in this, and not Hamas, but Palestinian citizens who, even from whether it's David Petraeus or Congressman Seth Moulton or others, saying, hey, there has to be a political horizon for these people?
Yeah. Well, look, I think you can take that position and not be anti-Semitic, and I think perhaps it's because many people in America are so surprised at the extent of the support for Palestinians. But I do think there's a deal of anti-Semitism in the United States, and I think we're seeing it now.
Well, former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, I really appreciate you coming on this show and sharing your candid views. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Now we turn to Sarah Lee Whitson, the former Executive Director of Human Rights Watch in the Middle East and North Africa, and currently the Executive Director of Democracy for the Arab World Now. Sarah, it's very nice of you to join us today. This is a very sobering, disturbing subject on many levels. Let me just start out. If you were advising the Biden administration today, what would be a few of the key steps you would put in place in response to this crisis?
So very basically, we think it's important that the United States starts to enforce its own laws and rules with respect to weapons transfers to Israel. And I think even a minimal application would require a suspension of weapons if we are to be in compliance with U.S. laws. Second, the U.S. needs to support a ceasefire. We have seen in the over 40 days that the United States has solely permitted this war to continue by blocking basic, even pause resolutions until very, very late in the game.
Right.
No military advantage has come of it, really. All we have is an unbelievable level of death and destruction. By some calculations, over 75% of the casualties are civilians,
Right.
And over the vast majority of those are women and children. If we had pushed for a ceasefire from the very beginning, if we had stopped blocking a ceasefire, we might not see the carnage that we're seeing today. For medium term and long term, just to conclude the thought, we need to support international peacekeeping forces in Gaza, and we need to commit internationally to the reconstruction of Gaza so that we do not permit Israel to achieve its goal of depopulating Gaza, to ensure that the people of Gaza can return to their homes in what is now being called North Gaza, and to not allow the war crime of forced displacement to be fulfilled.
How do you get to some place where people feel they can live with dignity, they can live with autonomy, they can have rights and justice? How do we get there?
Well, I mean, those are two very different questions. I think the first is about the forced displacement of Palestinians, including some Israeli plans to relocate the people of Gaza to Egypt, for example. And some of the talking points that I'm seeing floated around there is that this is for their own protection, this is for their own security. No, it's not for their protection and it's not for their security. It is to fulfill Israel's long-held desire to depopulate Gaza. And the United States and the international community should not facilitate that. It should not facilitate creating a permanent buffer zone of Gaza's territory, nor should it agree to cramming Palestinians in so-called South Gaza permanently, and certainly should not agree to forcing Palestinians to go to Egypt and to try to resettle them there. If the people of Gaza need urgent medical care, Israel is responsible for providing them that military care. Why doesn't Israel open up its own borders and boundaries if it wants the people of Gaza to flee from Israeli bombs and bombardment? Egypt should not have to shoulder that burden and find itself complicit in these war crimes. As for a longer-term solution, I think that for the last 30 years, via the Oslo Accords, the international community has been stuck in a stale and expired framework that demands some kind of a negotiated solution between two blocs, one bloc being the Palestinian people and one bloc being the Israeli people. And only after that negotiated solution can Palestinians hope to enjoy basic human rights, equality, and freedom. That's a failed approach. And the right approach is to say that, in fact, the first thing that needs to happen is that Israel needs to respect them. I think it's very important for viewers to understand that though these people are called prisoners, many of them are not lawfully imprisoned. They've never had a trial. They've never had evidence presented against them. They've never been able to challenge their detention and their imprisonment because they are subject to military rules that allow for what Israel calls administrative detention. That means that I, as the state, can imprison you on the basis of secret evidence that I don't tell you what that secret evidence is, without bringing you before a judge, and renew that detention and that imprisonment indefinitely in perpetuity. So many of the people who are now released from Israeli captivity have never been lawfully imprisoned. They have never been found guilty of any crime. So to call them criminals is really jumping ahead of the evidence. And we know that there are thousands of Palestinians, including women, including children, who are imprisoned in this Kafkaesque, unbelievable system of imprisoning people on secret evidence indefinitely.
But a lot of people look at the Israeli-Gaza crisis as a function of proxy battles of other places. And I guess the question I have is, how much of this is, that's a mistaken blind spot? This is really about Palestinian justice, not Iran, not a pro-union. I want to know how you look at it.
I think it's an insult to Palestinians to say that they are merely proxy agents of Iran. Iran may be choosing to support some armed groups in the Middle East, just as other parties in the region, very unfortunately, very sadly, support other armed groups in the region, just the way the United States was supporting armed groups in Syria, just the way that other countries have unfortunately been supporting armed groups and terrorist acts inside Iran. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone is innocent of that. But let's not confuse that with the grievances of and exploit them, of course, maybe for nefarious ends or not, but that doesn't take away from the fundamental grievance. As for the larger geopolitical consequences of what's happened since October 7, I think it has exposed really the complete failure of the Biden administration's strategy and approach to the Middle East, one that was predicated on pursuing so-called stability by aligning an apartheid state, apartheid Israel, with various petrodollar dictatorships in the region, and thinking that they could bypass the Palestinian entirely, the Palestinian problem entirely, by building these little dictatorial alliances in the region. I think that has been exploded as a strategy for stability. You will not have stability so long as you have this sort of extreme oppression and subjugation. The natural human instinct is to resist and to fight back. And you will not be able to ignore the occupation of Palestinians and bypass resolving that conflict as a path to Middle East stability and security. I hope that the Biden administration has woken up to that reality. And I hope that the Arab states that signed the Abraham Accords, thinking that they too could profit and benefit from bypassing Palestinians by getting little payoffs from the United States, I hope they too rethink that and rethink the dangers to their own stability for being seen so closely aligned to Israel in the face of this massive slaughter of civilians there. But that remains to be seen.
Sarah Lee Whitson, Executive Director of Dawn and former Executive Director of Human Rights Watch in the Middle East and North Africa, thanks so much for your candor in joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the bottom line? I feel Ambassador Bolton is wrong on ideas like resettling Palestinians elsewhere, which amounts to a continuation of the ethnic removal of Palestinians from the occupied territory. Some would call this ethnic cleansing, a war crime. But he is correct when he says that any resolution of the Palestinian question is really hard to achieve, whether it's a one-state system that's blind to religion and ethnicity, or two separate states, or any plan that really offers dignity and autonomy for Palestinians. That's why there's a war underway. And the dereliction of responsibility of world powers on this problem has led to this global, horrible conflict in which so many are dying. It's hard to listen to views that we disagree with, but we do have to hear the spectrum of debate as it really is in Washington today, not what we would wish it to be. And that's the bottom line.
Okay. Ayan. Okay, dito lang tayo sa news na ito. Medyo balance po pagtanaw po ng problema, no? Hindi po katulad ng iba. Okay, talagang favor not favor po sa bansang Israel, mga kawan. Ibang news outlet, no? Okay, dito, okay, may pagka-balance po ang pagbalita, mga suki, no? Okay, mga tagapagin. Sandali lang, ipagpatuloy natin ang balita, no? Okay, susunod na ipakinggan natin ang propaganda naman ni Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken, okay, ng Secretary of State, okay, ng Amerika, no? Alam mo, kahit hindi ka maniwala sa mga balita, mga propaganda, hindi ka maniwala sa kanila, kailangan din marinig, mga suki, no? Ganon po ang okay, pagbalanse po ng balita, no? Okay, nayawan mo ng mga ng mga balita ay hindi naman totoo. Pero kahit ganon, kasi ganon po ang pag-handle ng balita, no? Hindi ka lang sa kabilang panig. Kailangan po ay nasa gitna ka. Patingnan natin ang propaganda po ni Anthony Blinken, mga suki, no? Kung ano naman sinasabi niya rito.
Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace and security. We want this war to end as soon as possible. There's been far too much loss of life, far too much suffering. But it's vital that Israel achieve its very legitimate objectives of ensuring that October 7th can never happen again. We believe they've made considerable progress toward that goal. At the same time, I think it's very important to remember that everyone has choices to make, and that includes Hamas. Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace and security. We want this war to end as soon as possible. There's been far too much loss of life, far too much suffering. But it's vital that Israel achieve its very legitimate objectives of ensuring that October 7th can never happen again. We believe they've made considerable progress toward that goal. At the same time, I think it's very important to remember that everyone has choices to make, and that includes Hamas. Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace and security. We want this war to end as soon as possible. There's been far too much loss of life, far too much suffering. But it's vital that Israel achieve its very legitimate objectives of ensuring that October 7th can never happen again. We believe they've made considerable progress toward that goal. At the same time, I think it's very important to remember that everyone has choices to make, and that includes Hamas. Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace and security. We want this war to end as soon as possible.
Okay, so 3 beses na, no? Okay, nulit-ulit natin. Okay, statement po ng State Department. Okay, Secretary Anthony Blinken, no? Okay, kahit na hindi ka maniwala ganun po sa balita, mga suki, no? Okay, kahit hindi ka na maniwala, importante rin marinig po ang kabilang panig, no? Ayan.
Ensuring that October 7th can never happen again. We believe they've made considerable progress toward that goal. At the same time, I think it's very important to remember that everyone has choices to make, and that includes Hamas. Israel must stop taking steps.
Okay, tama na. So, yan po ang latest po ata kay Anthony Blinken, no? Okay, Secretary ng Estado, okay, ng Amerika, mga 5 beses na po pumunta sa Middle East, lalo na po dyan sa Palestine, mga kababayan, no? So, wala pang, okay, magandang resulta po ay nakukuha natin, okay, sa kanilang pagbisita dyan, no? Okay. Matigas po ang panindigan po ng okay, itong panindigan po ng leader po ng extreme. Okay, extreme Zionist leader po itong si Benjamin Netanyahu, no? Ayan. Okay, na-explain na lahat ng dalawang news. Okay, lipat naman tayo maghanap ng balita mga suki, no? Okay, sandali lang. Ito po. Okay, anong oras na? Naku, overtime na po mga suki. 20 minutos po pasado alas 8, no? Okay, overtime naman. Anong pwede natin may balita po sa national, no? Okay, natapos na po yung pagbisita po ng leader po, presidente po ng Indonesia, kasama po ng entourage. Okay, dito po sa ating bansa, 3 araw at ano? Okay, itong si President Joko Widodo mga suki, no? Okay. So, saan tayo pupunta? Okay, sandali lang, no? Okay, usapan pera, ang palitan po ng peso to greenback, isang dolyares. Okay, 56 araw nito, no? 56 to $1, nung taas. Okay. Okay, maraming picture ng pera, pero tayo walang pera mga suki, no? Yan ang problema. Pero picture ng pera ay napakarami po, no? Okay, sa news. Okay, Manila, Philippines, the peso Pierce, no? Okay, the 56 pesos to 1 greenback level yesterday, weakening by 32 centavos. Okay, to close at a 6.01 from 55.69 last Monday. Okay, the local currency open weaker. Ayan, at a 55 at a 55.73, but bounce back on an intraday high of a magkano? Okay, 55.635 before losing steam to hit an intraday low of a 56.09 centavos, no? Ano, yung mga mag-trader po dito, anong pag-ibig sabihin? Kumita yon, no? Kumita ba siya o talo sila? Ayan po mga suko. Wala naman talo rito po sa pag-trade po ng pera mga suki, no? bihira ata matalo. Okay. Kasi araw-araw po kinukuha ang rate, no? Okay, yung mga negosyante po sa mga exchange rate, no? Okay, sa mga local, okay, pati sa mga bangko, kung saan-saan, no? Ayan. Okay, Michael Ricaport, Chief Economist of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, said the peso weakened for the third straight trading day to hit its lowest level since closing at a 56.055. Okay, to 1 greenback. 1 greenback. Trading po sa pera to peso to dollar, malakas mga suki, no? Okay, equivalent to 2.22 billion from Monday at a 1.54 billion. Okay, volume po ang na-double po ang pag-trade po sa peso to dollares, no? Okay. Ayan. Ricaport said, okay, the local currency weekend, okay, weekends, no, pahina. A day after Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno's signal a possible 100 basis point cut on interest rate this year. Ricaport said the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, BSP, would likely match the 75 basis point out by the U.S. Federal Reserve. He also cited the plan of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to limit intervention in the local foreign exchange market amid the easing inflation trend that could provide some support for the peso. The Ricaport said immediate major resistance is at the 56.10 to 56.30 level, where the immediate major support level is at a 55 to 55 point. Okay, 65 versus 1 greenback, mga kababayan, no? Equivalent to 1 greenback. Pag $1. Ayan po ang kasaysayan po ng itong kalakalan. Trading po ng peso. Okay, sa dolyares, mga kababayan. Okay, stock report wala, no? Okay, anong stock report natin? Umita ba o ayan. Usapang politika sa kanilang mga suki. Ayan po, mga kababayan, no? Okay. 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 Sige na. Sige na po, ay paalam tayo, mga suki, mga kababayan, na. Okay, ang Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, ang video, okay, ay nag-increase po ng 5 billion via sustainability bonds. Okay, mangutang po ng pera, no? Mag-issue po ng pera itong video. Bangko de Oro po ng SM. Ibig sabihin, pag-develop naman po ng pagparami naman, okay, ng kanilang investment po ang video, kasi ang mayari ito SM, mga kababayan, SM Holding, no? SM Group of Companies. Ayan. So tapos na po ang balita, ito na po ang marinig nyo. Ayan. Okay, sa US po, sa US politics, no? Ang former First Lady, okay, Michelle Obama, kung papasok siya sa primary, ang taas po ng kanyang, okay, ang kanyang social media platform, no? Okay, umabot po ng 77,000. Okay, ang ay mag-like sa kanyang huling mga statement po sa publiko. Okay, sa United States of America, no? Okay, former First Lady ng 8 taon, itong si Michelle Obama. Kung papasok ito, madali po ay, parang madali tulungan po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, former First Lady, okay, Michelle Obama enter politics. Okay, she's very easy to support her, no? Okay. Okay, dapat itong mga African leaders, okay, itong parte ng South Africa, malaking continent sa daigdig, ay dapat po ay back up nila po itong si former First Lady po Michelle Obama, no? Okay. Iba na mga tulong katulad sa mga Asian origin, no? Okay, sa mga Latino, mga South Africa, at saka itong mga African American mga suki, no? Madali ang parang madali sumikat mga suki. 77,000. Can you imagine yan? Kung abot yan mga million na. Okay? Madali po mag-garner ng million po ng supporter mga suki, no? Okay, itong si former First Lady Michelle Obama, no? Okay, wala silang sa loob ng 8 taon sa White House, wala kang marinig mga iskandalo po mga kababayan. Okay, mahusay po ang pamuno nila, no? Palibhas ay mag-asawa po ay parehas po abogado mga suki, no? Okay, sana tuloy-tuloy. Okay, pag meron backup itong mga political support, political funds, okay, meron mag-raise ng mga political support, madali po ay magkampanya mga suki, no? Okay, sa primary. Importante primary ay manalo. Okay, ng itong si Joe Biden pahina ng pahina mga kababayan, na. Okay, pahina ng pahina. Okay, sa mga latest political trending, political survey, okay, pinagiwanan po ni former President Donald Trump, no? Okay, sana ay magkaroon po ng alternative. Okay, itong si itong Democrats mga suki. Kung gusto nila ma-retain, okay, uli po ang party nila itong Democrats mga kababayan, na. Ayan. Okay, so it's a matter of pushing. Okay, another alternative leader, okay, to sustain, okay, the Democratic Party, no? In the US election in 2024. November na po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, so ngayon ay papasok na yan sa primary. Okay, para po ay kung sino po ay i-endorse ng party, no? Okay, pagdating ng pilian. Okay, so yan po ang latest trending po ni former First Lady Michelle Obama, no? Okay, malaking pag-asa po ay maging okay, pumalit kay Biden. Okay, kung tutulungan po ng mga kapwa nila, yung mga mag-endorse po, okay, public endorsement, okay, kay Michelle Obama, no? Ayan. Okay, mag-aantay tayo kung ano po ang mga latest po, okay, kaganapan sa US, no? Ngayon, talagang bagsak na bagsak po si Joe Biden, mga suki. Wala ka ng, okay, nakita mo yung latest Okay, nagsigaw mga tao, ceasefire, ceasefire mga kababayan na sa kanyang speech. Okay, grabe. Ayan. Okay, mga kababayan, wala na tayong balita dito sa Consolidated News natin sa himpilan po ng ADLSNTV News Online. Okay, International. Ayan po mga suki, mga kababayan na. Ayan. Okay, pinapondohan po ng tulungan po ng Mind of Global Food Lines. Kaya nga makaproduce tayo ng balita, no? Okay, itong programa natin. Kung wala ito, wala na. Wala na tayong balita mga suki, no? Wala na kayong marinig na balita. Magpasalamat tayo ay meron Mind of Global Food Lines. Okay, magtulong. Okay, mag-back up po dito sa programa natin, na. Okay, salamat din kay Tarhata Abdul Karim ng Cotabato correspondent natin, no? Okay, kaisa-isa lang. Okay, pero kahit mag-isa, okay, hindi mo kaya pabagsakin po si Tarhata Abdul Karim mga suki, no? Okay, sa kanyang mga pagbabalita. Okay, hindi rin gumawa ng balita po na hindi totoo. Katulad ko rin. Ayan po mga suki. Okay, tapos na tayo sa balita sa gabing ito. Okay, paalam tayo. Wala tayong masamang tinapay sa kapwa. Except ay tayo ay magbibigay po ng tamang information sa publiko mga kababayan, no? Okay, paalam tayo. Babalik tayo bukas, Thursday bukas ng umaga. Ayan. This has been Abs Damahan lamang po, no? Sa gabing ito. Ayan, sa ADLSNTV Corporation, no? International. Bye na. Okay, mga suki. So, i-welcome natin po si Joko Widodo, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. At saka kanyang entourage. Welcome. Okay, President Joko Widodo, no? Okay, naging presidente ito nung panahon po ni former President Barack Obama sa term niya, no? Okay, sa first term ba yun o second term? Okay, nila Justin Trudeau mga suki, mga kababayan. Sila yan. Okay, mga batang-bata po ay mga baby boomer po ng mga leader mga suki, no? Hanggang ngayon si Justin Trudeau, okay, siya pa rin ang Prime Minister po ng Canada, no? So nung panahon pa yun ni former President Barack Obama, siya po umupo sa White House. Okay. Bye-bye na.